So, hi students, hope you all are doing very well. Welcome to another very exciting session of healthcare entrepreneurship. Today, we are going to talk about something very important, which is regulations and standards. Specifically, we would like to focus on the ones which are important when you are building, let's say, medical devices, or you are building certain products which are in several parts part of the healthcare ecosystem, or building other wearable technologies and several other products, right? So what are the regulations and standards which you have to comply with? What do they actually mean? So let's get started. So talking about the regulatory requirements in India, the key challenge or key importance of the same is to basically safeguard the health and safety, right? If we do not have any regulatory requirements or compliance, then anybody can build anything and put it inside somebody's body, and things can go wrong. There is no testing or no discipline or no criteria there, right? So the idea here is to safeguard the health and safety. So basically the government of India basically has set up several regulatory requirements for manufacturing and sales of goods and services, including those which are imported, right? So it's not like you import certain goods and straight on go for them, like for your day-to-day activities, right? Like they have to also be regulated, right? Regulations are typically stipulated through various acts, rules and regulations by different ministries under the government of India. This is something we have to understand. The enactment of acts, rules and regulations is done taken into cognizance the relevant WTO agreements, that's World Trade Organization based agreements. So this is regulations and standards basically take a very iterative approach, where there may be technologies which have come up and the regulations have not really caught up with them. They are going to eventually be framed in the coming years, or it's a completely set of steps which keeps on updating, and like there are change of rules and regulations around based on the import and export rules and so many things. So it's a very complex and dynamic system. So most of the details which I am going to present today in this lecture is all based on public information. So several of these places you may not see specific citations, because these have all been derived or taken from public information or databases which are available to the general public, right? And I tried to put a bunch of things together from there, right? So let's dig in deeper. So in terms of regulatory requirements in India, what are the key considerations? So the first few here reads like this: regulatory measures should be minimum required. So you should be basically focusing on while building these regulations, that it is not very stringent. It is not stringent to that extent that it is not allowing the new budding entrepreneurs to jump into the space at all. So they should be minimally required and complied with, and at least we should be complying with certain international standards, right? It should have minimum compliance costs, right? So while considering these requirements, if it has a very high compliance cost, you will never be able to venture in these spaces, right? Like as a small startup company. It should benefit the society. So when the government of India is looking at regulations, they are thinking from this lines. It should benefit the society. It should not be something which just creates a bar on certain groups of startups and segments of products. Like that's not the idea. It is for the general benefit of the society. The regulatory measures should comply with the laws of the country. Of course, this has to be compliant. They should be made and enforced in a transparent manner. So it should not be like they're enforced for certain entities and the other entities are getting by without getting them enforced. So it should be enforced in a very transparent manner, and many of these like documents and other details are kind of rolled out in public domain every now and then for transparency, right? Regulations should be fairly and treat all equitably. So this should be fair and equitable. They should be drafted in a clear and simple language for understanding of all. So basically, when you're talking of this scenario, you're looking at a lot of manufacturers a lot of sales persons, they are not all like people from academics or people who really have a degree in understanding regulatory requirements and other details, or degree in law. So they should be drafted in a clear and simple language, basically for the understanding of all. So that's one of the key requirements. And finally, the regulatory measures should be flexible for amendments and revisions. They should not be so hard and fast that you cannot go back and change anything, because a lot of these scenarios change. Like we have seen one of the cases where during the pandemic, coming out with a vaccine became very important, right? So if you have a very stringent regulation where you cannot roll out a vaccine in 3 years or 2.5 years, it has to go through these many number of trials, then you cannot adapt to these kind of scenarios, right? And many of the healthcare scenarios happen as an emergency, right? Many of these devices and technologies build up in form of emergencies, right? Like, so how do you cater to that, right? So it has to be flexible for amendments and revision if required due to changed circumstances. So there could be so many different circumstances in the country, right? So from a foreign trade standpoint, quality regulations in India are typically for imports overlooked by the Directorate General of Foreign Trade, which is uh, specifically the topmost body, and then there are relevant regulatory agencies, and then there is Bureau of Indian Standards for just 68 products. So out of so many products in the market, Bureau of Indian Standards only applies very strongly for 68 products typically. This number may have changed, this is a little older data, this is probably not the latest updated version, like so that's a caveat for all of you. So for the exports, it is basically looked upon by the Export Inspection Council, right? So that's these are all based on public information which I have gathered. So I may not be the most updated in some of these latest findings, so just bear with me on that, but majority of this should be fairly accurate, right? So then we want to look at some acts, regulation and control orders to regulate trade in India, and who are the agencies involved. So if you are looking at Prevention of Food Adulteration Act, and which is as per the US FDA, kind of in line with that. So this is being basically controlled by the Directorate General of Health Services, right, DGHS. And then you have plant quarantine, where you have regulations of import into India. So you cannot always bring in any kind of outside plants or sometimes soils and other things into the Indian land. This is taken care by the Department of Agriculture and Cooperation. Insecticides Act, this is Department of Agriculture and Cooperation again. Fruit Products Order 1955. So several of these are fairly old acts, and they have been updated quite a bit over time, but these are just the ministries which are highlighted, which takes care or regulates these acts, right? Ministry of Food Processing Industries, then you have Meat Food Product Order, then Milk and Milk Product Order. So several of these things have an implication in the healthcare space. If milk products or food products are going bad, then this has a huge implication on the health, right? So then you have the Directorate General of DGHS, like, which is taking care of the milk and milk product order, right? Standards on weight and measurement, this is from the Department of Legal Metrology. Then Bureau of Indian Standards Act 1986 looks at the Department of Consumer Affairs, Government of India. This is Agmark Act 1937 is looked upon by the Directorate of Marketing and Inspection, right? Let's look next. So some acts, regulations to regulate trade in India, so drugs and cosmetic rules are looked upon by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. We may have been seeing this highlight of this ministry very much like during the pandemic, because they were serving quite a bit of very important role into the regulation of the vaccines, and tracking of the COVID cases, having the Arogya Setu app, and so many things kind of which were regulated. But typically the drugs and cosmetic rules are all fall in the purview of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, right? Textile regulation 1988 come under the Ministry of Textiles. Export, including the quality control and inspection, comes under the Export Inspection Council of India. The Indian Explosive Act 1884 comes under the Chief Controller of Explosives, and the Mines Act come under the Directorate General of Mines Safety. So, these are the major kind of the regulatory bodies which are there in India. So, then there are several components or several products which need mandatory regulation, several products which do not need mandatory regulation, right. Like, so to regulate through mandatory certification by BIS, which is the Bureau of Indian Standards, the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act. So, products like infant milk products, packaged drinking water and natural mineral water, these are all have to be certified, right, through BIS. Infant milk substitutes, feeding bottles, infant foods, plastic feeding bottles, they have to be also very much certified, right, because these have huge implication on the healthcare space. Then electric wires, cables, appliances, protected device and accessories which form part of several wearable technologies and several instruments and robots are also under Bureau of Indian Standards Act, right. Gas cylinders, if they are being used for any form of like industrial requirement or healthcare in a hospital space, right, they have to become coming under the Indian Explosive Act, right. Clinical thermometers should come under the BIS, right. So, they have to be certified mandatorily. You cannot have just a clinical thermometer produced from somewhere and do not have the certification, right. So, many of the startup companies, if you do not see that certification, do not use them, right. Pressure stoves, steel tubes, many of which form part of the hospital anesthesia systems. There are so many other systems for gases and chemicals handling, like they come under the Essential Commodities Act, right. Then you have compression ignition or diesel engines, like that's outside the healthcare space, that comes under the Environmental Protection Act. Then cement, for example, comes under the BIS Act, right. So, these are some of the products which are requiring mandatory certification from the BIS. So, typically the Indian Standards Institution, which is now known as the Bureau of Indian Standards, just very much next to IIT Delhi, set up back in 1947. It is functioning under the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Food and Public Distribution, Government of India, as a statutory body under BIS Act with effect from 1987, April 1st. This is the National Standards Body of India, right. Some of the key objectives of this body is harmonious development of standardization and quality control in national and international arena. Again, these are all public information, so feel free to look them up. These I may not be most accurate as per the latest findings which are there, right. So, certification schemes for products and systems, then growth and so lots of products and systems are basically certified. Then growth and development of the Indian industry, commerce and exports, consumer protection. So, the consumer protection also comes under one of the key objectives of BIS, right. So, what is the key approach to standardization? Standards formulated by BIS are primarily voluntary in nature. This is very interesting insight. We would like to think that majority of the technologies we want to take it out, if we want to build it in the healthcare or any other space specifically, has to have some standards, but that is typically not true. So, BIS very similar to several other international standards have set up standards which may be followed. They have to be voluntarily followed, right. The majority of them are not mandatory to be followed, right. Very interesting point is, through various acts and regulations, out of more than 18,000 standards formulated so far under BIS, only 68 standards are subjected to mandatory certification. This is something very good to know. So, you would typically want to see if your product category, whatever you are trying to build in the healthcare space, falls in any of the 68 categories. And actually, interestingly, many of the healthcare products do fall within this category, because they could be invasive, they are going inside the body, so have to have some extra regulations, right. So, the technical committee structure is basically having, for this is having manufacturers, then there are consumers, government departments, then at the lowest strata you have the technologies, regulating authorities, testing labs, consultants, universities, other experts. So, there is a huge ecosystem. It is just not one panel of expert or one committee which is kind of overseeing this entire operation of building standards. So, you have a lot of stakeholders here, which includes the consumers, manufacturers, auditors, consultants, universities such as IIT Delhi, right, like for example. So, I have known quite a few standards which are framed in collaboration with IITs and things like that. So, we particularly give feedbacks on certain standards based on our research and several other activities which we do, right. So, the basic approach is more of a consensus principle and a balanced committee structure. So, typically the idea is not to be something which is like technically this way or that way. It is just to have a consensus like that these are some of the standard guidelines which we want to follow for this particular products or services, right, and they are built upon experience and all the expertise from the relevant stakeholders here. What are the key steps of standard formulation? So, there is an accepted code of good practice for TBT agreement, which is technical barriers to trade agreement. International standards and their relevant parts are quite often used in standard setting, right. So, many a times many of these standards which are formulated in India have adaptation from quite a few international standards, because we are right now in a very globalized economy where a lot of our products are not only being sold in India, but worldwide, and this includes the healthcare products which are going out from India, and some of them are being regulated in multiple countries, like according to their laws of the land. So, some meeting of the international standards is also required. So, some of the laws or regulations in India are fit around the international standards or framed around the Indian international standards. However, in the case of fundamental technical, geographical or climatic problems, standards are set as per national requirements. So, just in the case of fundamental technical, geographical or climatic problems which are very unique to our location or very unique to India are only set as per the national requirements. So, something which does not have a purview outside India are set as per the national requirements, but things which can be applicable to worldwide basically have some adaptation of some international standards. As NSB BIS takes full part in the development of international standards relevant to national needs. So, BIS also has a lot of participation, or they are vocal about setting up standards at an international level as well. So, BIS is not only setting up standards for the Indian population, but they are also participating in several bodies which are building standards for at the international level, right. The standards formulation is built upon consensus and transparency. Consensus is where everybody has a similar idea or are agreeing to something together, right, even though there may be some disagreements. So, typically all standards which are coming out of this are widely circulated at the draft stage. So, like typically they are open for public opinion, and many a times they are public documents where somebody can give an opinion within a certain time frame. So, period of comments is generally not less than 3 months. So, that gives enough window before these standards are finalized. If somebody has come up with a new research or expertise who wants to give some comments, that can be considered, like, and this is the case scenario with the foreign countries as well. Like, I've seen this in the US, like where I was involved in development of certain standards, and we had given quite a few feedbacks and comments based on our research, and they were considered, right, and incorporated as well into the next draft of the system, right. Like, so for urgent reasons pertaining to safety, health or environment, period can be reduced. So, in several cases, like we have seen in during the pandemic, where a drug needs to be created or a vaccine needs to be created, or there is some kind of an epidemic where some very quick action needs to be done in terms of medical regulations or release of certain drugs, these things are usually expedited, like, because that is the call of the time, right. So, drafts documented are hosted on the BIS website for public comments, and this is what I was referring to. All comments are duly considered by the appropriate authorities. So, if there is something completely out of context, that's a separate part, but if this is a genuine comment like which caters to that particular draft standard, like then it will be duly considered, right. Program of work is published and also hosted on BIS website and is periodically updated, right. So, how the work is progressing on developing of the draft and other steps of it is typically updated on a periodic way, like on the BIS website. This is again some data from like almost a year and a half back, and this may have changed. This is based on some public information again. So, the number of Indian standards published so far exceed 18 or 19,000. Corresponding ISO or IEC standards are about 5,800, which may be a little higher now. Standards harmonized with ISO IEC standards are 4,449. This is a little bit older data. Almost 76% or more than 75% of standards are harmonized with ISO. ISO is an international set of standards, right. So, they are harmonized with ISO means they are adapted, some of the things are adapted from the international standards and they are built accordingly with some specific requirements for the country. This involves a lot of divisional councils, like around 14 councils, technical committees more than 300, and technical experts almost 12,000. So, you can imagine how rigorous the process is of building or drafting regulations or standards, right. And this technical experts are divided into section committees, subcommittees, panels and whatnot, right. So, this is how complex and nicely and with a lot of due diligence the different standards and regulations are built in our country, right. Good to know. This is just a representative outline of how the standards become national standard. So, there is typically a new work item which is explored, and there is a first draft of what needs to be regulated, what are the correct practices, what are the wrong practices around that product or service. Then it involves circulation with to committee members, like who are majorly the stakeholders here. There could be different hierarchies or levels of the committee through this these drafts go. So, this could be some initial committee which takes a look. They come back with certain comments, and then there is another draft which is built, right, based on that. Then you have a circulation to the committee members. They could be the same committee and it is referred to a higher set of committee members. Further comments come in, and then there are meetings which is followed by revising on the draft and building a much more balanced draft, and then there is public circulation. So, once they are satisfied from the committee standpoint that the regulation draft looks okay, and let us look for public comments. That is what really happens, So, then the next thing is there is another meeting to look at the public comments, and like what can be incorporated, if anything needs any revisions or serious updates or whatnot. Then there is basically a further draft which incorporates all those details, and then there is adoption by the division council, and then finally it becomes a national standard. This is kind of the schematic of things. So, there is a lot of due diligence and set procedures. So, it takes time, right. It takes time and a lot of effort goes into it, which I think all of us should acknowledge. Let us look further. So, what are the key certification activities of BIS? So, this is operating under the Act of the Parliament, which is the BIS Act 1986, offers third party assurance. What that means is based on a well defined scheme of testing and inspection, ensuring adequacy of in process quality control, right. So, BIS can provide third party assurance, meaning there are several centers or testing agencies or testing labs and offices which BIS has certified, and if you get the particular products tested within this labs or settings, then they are indirectly giving a third party assurance from this, right. So BIS labs and other labs are there, testing labs, very similar to like sending your blood sample, right. You are not always sending your blood sample to the same hospital every day, like Apollo or any other hospital which you refer to. You are often giving them out to Max labs or Lalpath labs and Dr. Reddy's lab. There are so many other places in which you give your blood samples and you get the diagnostic done, right. So these labs are typically certified from some agencies, right. Like otherwise anybody can open a blood sample like certification thing like in their house and start doing this. That is not possible, right. So typically BIS regulates these activities of certification through this specific labs. So accreditation of these specific agencies, third party agencies, have to be under the NLA, which is the National Laboratory for Accreditation. The scheme according to this is ISO IEC 17025, right. So these are some numbers. It's good to know what is the procedure and what are the rules and regulations, right. So based on the type 5 of ISO guide 28, which is something with dealing with the certification scheme, type testing of and assessment of factory quality control and its acceptance is followed by surveillance that take into account the audit of factory quality control and testing of samples both from factory and open market. What this means is there are many of the manufacturing firms like or manufacturing industries. This could be in the medical devices and other wearable technologies and footwear manufacturers. So many manufacturers are there for different devices and processes, and this goes beyond the healthcare space. It's all across the products. So typically if they have to be certified, there is a quality control of the factory which is looked upon, and that is assessed by and some auditors. And also the quality control is understood not only from the factory itself but also from the open market, where some of these products can be picked up and checked for the right quality, right. Like, and then only these certifications are given properly. So certification scheme for foreign manufacturers. 93 licenses have been granted in 16 countries such as France, UAE, South Korea, Nepal, Switzerland, Thailand, Bhutan and China, etc. So they have several licenses which allow them certifications like for certain products, indigenized products, like to be sold in these kind of markets. Products certified include packaged drinking water, cement, wood products, steel products, milk products, clinical thermometers, energy meters, electric appliances and switchgear items. So these are the broad scheme of things which are quite often certified, right. The criteria for notification, which is the regulation notification practices, includes assessment of whether international standard exists or technical content differs from international standards. So notification of a standard or a notification of a regulation is almost the final stage, or the stage that sometimes the initial or pre-initial stages, like where you're trying to look at that this is a notification, this is a new standard which we are trying to build. So initially you look into the literature and see, are there any international standards which are similar, which from which some of these details can be adopted. Impact of regulation on trade. So can setting this particular regulation can really affect the trade of this particular product on a mass scale of things. So all of a sudden if you come up with the regulations on the pharmacy industry, right, then this can really make it difficult to export pharmaceutical drugs like from the country to abroad and vice versa, right. So you also look at these kind of details, what is the impact on regulation of trade, impact on the regulation trading, like basically. So whether regulation deals with technical requirements or SPS measures for product group of products, relevance under these agreements have to be looked upon, right. Various sources that are consulted are typically the TBT agreement and relevant committee recommendations and decisions. Regulatory agencies are responsible for the regulation, right. So this is just for information, based on public information, right. Preparation of the notification involves initiated by regulator of proposed legislations, complete notification format by the regulatory body in consultation of Ministry of Commerce, clear and descriptive outline of the regulatory proposal, give adequate time to comment on the proposal, that is based on the schematic which I just explained, reasonable time for adoption of measure. So, typically these are not rushed upon, but due diligence and time is basically taken to look through all the steps, right. The submission is typically done through preparation of notifications which are sent to WTO Central Registry of Notification, which is CRN by the National Notification Authority. So, these regulatory standards are notified by those authorities at the final stages, right. MOUs and MRAs tools for regulatory, which are key essential tools for regulatory cooperation. So, BIS has signed around MOUs with 15 countries with a view to enhance cooperation in standardization and conformity assessment. So, let us say if we are trying to sell certain products in Bangladesh, they should not have a different regulatory requirement as what we are giving them from India. Then it is a different hassle for them to sell certain medical products or devices in their country, right. Or if we have a certain requirement with Thailand, right, let us say. So, that is also very difficult, right. Like, so that is why BIS has signed MOUs with almost 15 countries where they are really exporting and having an issue with standardization to maintain a certain level of standards which are followed uniformly across the countries with having the MOUs, right. And they are trying to also conform with the standards in both countries, right. There is also this requirement for facilitation of expertise and mutual trade. So, quite a few times there would be committees traveling from one country to another, typically from India to the exported country, like basically to talk about what these regulations are, to spread an awareness and get some feedbacks as well. So, one example is an MRI with Sri Lanka, which is a trade facilitation, like this is an example. Then Indo-US cooperation initiative is one of the clauses there, where Indo-US portal is a commitment by BIS and ANSI to provide a common platform for required transparency for trade, facilitate sharing of information on trade issues, provide mutual support at an international forum, right. Facilitate harmonization of standards and conformity assessment procedures to increase transparency. So, many of the products which are sold by companies like in India which are going abroad, there could be medical implants, there could be products which are non-medical, there are several electronic based products which are going out which are partially used in medical products. So, many of these are whichever goes to the US territory are basically regulated by this Indo-US cooperation treaty or initiative, under which and there has to be a certain level of transparency and mutual support and sharing of information, right. And there is a common platform for all the updating of any other information or standard updates, right. Then there are regional cooperation initiatives like the establishment of SARSO, which is South Asian Regional Standards Association, with the objective that there needs to be coordination and cooperation between the SAARC countries, right, in standards and conformity assessment. The standards here are just to maintain the same standards when a product is going from one country to another, and conformity assessment is they are conforming to that standards, how to make sure. What are the guidelines to make sure that somebody is not goofing up with those products, they are going exactly as per standards and can be checked at the other end that whether they are conforming with the standards, right. The next part is developing harmonized standards, like something which is harmony and which can be in a friendly terms, like made standards which complies with the rules of the land, like for both the countries which are exchanging the products, as well as something which can be looked upon from a country's stringent regulations, as well as can take care of a country's relaxed regulations, like something in between which can be harmonized, right. Facilitate intra-regional trade. So, this is one of the key important parameters which is looked upon. There has to be a very easy trade path rather than a very difficult trade agreement. So, one example is in US you have the FDA, right. So, many of the devices, medical devices specifically, if you build them in India, like following certain Indian standards, and you send them out to the US for testing on patients, they have to again go through the FDA rules and regulations. That is because the harmonization of the standards are not that much as par, but like several of the standards and joint treaties are being done together to basically harmonize them and make sure the number of steps are reduced when there is a inter-country movement, right. Then promote MRS on conformity assessment. This is another aspect. Then, so the next part which requires a highlight if you are looking at the medical device industry is this CDSCO. CDSCO is an organization under the government of India, which you will come across if you are looking at pharmaceutical drugs, medical devices, you are looking at wearable technologies. So, majority of the things under the healthcare space which are in form of products would typically be covered by SDSCO, and more and more products and devices are getting covered as the things are rolling. Like I had given the example of wearable technologies, where there is still a gray area where few of these technologies are not recognized, or it is left to be implemented the way it has to be implemented for the companies, but they are getting more and more rigorous into taking into account all sorts of medical devices and healthcare wearable and other technologies as well. So, CDSCO stands for the Central Drugs Standard Control Organization. So, this term drugs stands out. So, typically it was built for regulating the drugs and medical drugs specifically. This exercises regulatory control over the quality of drugs, cosmetics and notified medical devices in the country. This term notified is very, very important. So, there is a list of notification that these medical devices have to have CDSCO certification, right. Then you need to do a CDSCO certification before the commercialization. You can visit the website and look at the notifications, right. Majority of the devices in the wearable space are not under these notifications. They are upcoming, and a few of them may have come out, right, as we speak. So, it is the Central Drug Authority for discharging functions assigned to the central government under the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. So, these were the major purviews, like the drugs and the cosmetics, any kind of cosmetic industry based products, like that has to be regulated through the CDSCO certification, but now medical devices, more and more of them are also coming under the CDSCO radar, right. So, their vision is to protect and promote health in India. That's a very generic and straightforward vision, and the mission is to basically safeguard and enhance the public health by assuring the safety, efficacy and quality of drugs, cosmetics and medical devices. So, these kind of regulations are very, very important in the Indian setting, because as I had given few examples where like there is very easy case of like breaking the ethics, and I am going to take some talk about the ethics and other details in detail. So, that is where I had given some examples where several of the cases, the clinical trials or a device trials are not done correctly. So, they need to be regulated or put under the CDSCO kind of setting, right, like some regulatory body needs to see it. So, they are looking over these kind of medical devices. So, let us look at the specific functions of CDSCO. This includes laying down standards for drugs, cosmetics, diagnostics and devices, right, and laying down regulatory measures, amendments to acts and rules, right. These are also there. To regulate market authorization of new drugs. So, whenever a new pharmaceutical drug comes out in the market, or it could be like a invasive drug, like which goes inside the body as a part of a like some kind of treatment modality, they have to be going through the CDSCO set of regulatory points and have to get certified or get regulated as per that. To regulate clinical research in India, this is another thing which is slowly coming into place, right? Clinical research, where typically in the institutes, what we do conduct is we get an ethical clearance. There is an ethics committee which looks over. This has a panel of doctors from top institutes. This has panel of engineers, designers, some kind of stakeholders from the clinicians, and they typically approve whether a particular clinical research can be taken up. And this is the case with any institute, like across in the foreign country. But many of the private institutes in India, and if you look at several institutes, are not very much compliant with this ethics regulation. They have very small bodies of ethics, and it could be very easily like circumvented. So basically CDSCO is trying to get into also the clinical research regulation, right? The fifth function is to approve licenses to manufacture certain categories of drugs as central license approving authority. So it has already become the central license approving authority. It is the one which gives licenses for certain categories of the drugs, for also like blood banks, large volume parenteral vaccines, sera. So a lot of these vaccines has to be approved by the CDSCO, right? So that's the controlling body. To regulate the standards of imported drugs, this is also very, very important. There could be so many imported drugs which may not work well in the Indian setting, right? So we just cannot be getting a pharmaceutical drug from abroad and say let us start using it. And many of these are going to come along as we talk about mental health, right? Depression drugs, antidepressants, like there are so many other kind of drugs which are repurposed drugs, basically for mental issues and several other problems which are getting imported right now. So they have to be also be regulated to certain aspects. This could involve some clinical trials or involve certain levels of certification or literature review. That's left to a subjective opinion what specific regulations apply, but they have to maintain those standards through the CDSCO, right? Work relating to drugs technical advisory board and drugs consultative committee. These are the two organizations which kind of also collaborate with CDSCO, and CDSCO kind of performs their functions from the implementation standpoint. Testing of drugs by central drug labs. This is another thing which is facilitated by CDSCO. Central drugs labs are several labs which kind of measure, for example, what is the potency of a certain drug, are the mixtures of different elements or components correct, right? This is another point. So many a times, like you will see these are known as API manufacturers, active pharmaceutical ingredients manufacturers. Many of these companies will the lower strata of these companies will try to cut corners and mix some very low quality chemicals and details into these drugs and still kind of roll them out in high volume, right? So those kind of details are sometimes looked upon. So there was just a person who works with Pfizer and few other companies. He's into the pharmaceutical industry, and we're just speaking with him about how the APIs are API market is regulated. So they have a lot of cost sensitiveness, right? Like, so many a times certain chemicals or chemical compositions come in certain costs. Many a times we are fighting with trying to get a cost which is more competitive than China and several other countries which are doing that. So API manufacturing is another aspect like in which is controlled by the CDSCO, right? Publication of Indian pharmacopedia, like, so this is pretty much like the new pharmaceutical drug inventions, like what are the drug final rollouts, what are the clinical implications, these kind of many of the details, which is almost like a Wikipedia for the pharma, is being published by the CDSCO. These are some of the key functions from CDSCO. Next is classification of medical devices. So when we talk specifically about the medical device classification, in India there are 4 categories, and this is again based on public information, and these categories are the latest ones which I know. This may change over time. So, these are 4 categories based on their risk type, very similar to how FDA does it. Class A is typically low risk devices, class B is low to moderate risk devices, class C moderate to high risk devices, and class D are very high risk devices. So, you can think upon majority of the diagnostic devices which are non-invasive are lying lower in the class, like maybe A or B, right. High risk devices are maybe implants and technologies which are going inside your body, right. So, the assessment authority as per the class of devices is class A and class B are usually assessed by the state licensing authority, right. So, there are several state licensing authorities which come under the purview and have collaboration with CDSCO and the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Like, they look at the class A and class B devices, their authorization, and class C and D devices are kind of looked upon by the DCGI, which is a central licensing authority, right. So, all these devices have to go through stringent requirements to be sure that they comply with all the standards and have been tested well before they are being rolled out. This is very important. So, this is one of the links for the same. You can look it up, or if you just look up classification of medical devices, I am sure you will get a bunch of links which will tell you the same, right. So, as far as these classifications have evolved over time, so there have been so this is some chronology which I have picked up from one of these links, and I have correlated this with the chronology which has been published in several other places. So, new medical devices rules were in 2017 were made effective from the 1st of January 2018. This is where the government of India has actually recognized that there are so many medical devices which are currently manufactured and built in India, that there needs to be a very clear set of rules and guidelines around them, that what devices have to are fitting in which classes and things like that, and how they have to be tested, what are the key criteria or stringent requirements around them, right. In around April of 2020, quite close to when the pandemic was just coming in, there was a voluntary listing of non-regulated and non-notified devices, right. So, many of these devices were voluntarily listed, because many of the companies were clueless on whether these devices have certain regulations, and many of these devices were built for exports, right. So, they wanted to make sure that these are complying with such certain standards and certain international as well as the country standards, right. So, this led them to voluntarily register non-regulated and non-notified devices. By non-regulated devices mean they do not have any regulatory compliance. Non-notified devices, something which has not been notified by like the any ministry or the government of India as a device which needs any regulations, right. Then in November 2020, the ultrasound equipment was placed under the medical device rules category. In January, though this is going a little bit I think wrong in the dates. So, this is supposedly January 2021, when nebulizers, blood pressure monitoring devices, glucometers and digital thermometers, there was a huge onset of these devices, we can all imagine, due to the pandemic. Every person, every small little medical device industry or every pharmaceutical based startup, they were all trying to build like masks, sanitizers, digital thermometers, glucometers, and that had a huge implication on the quality. They were not giving the right results. So, that is where these medical device rules were applied for nebulizers, blood pressure monitoring devices, glucometers and digital thermometers. So, if you are trying to build any of these devices, they have stringent regulations now. April 2021, all implantable medical devices were placed under regulations. Before this, many of these implantable devices did not have regulations properly. Now, all the implantable devices, be it a dental implant to going for a hip implant or a stent implant, whatever implant you are looking at, any invasive implant device within the body are coming under regulatory compliances, right, and they are categorized under the different medical device risk categories. Radiation or diagnostic, radiation based diagnostic devices are again all regularized, right, all under regulations. Defibrillators, these are specifically for heart based issues like dialysis machines, these have all also been placed under these regulations. Bone marrow cell separators, like these are also bone marrow cell as well as separators, these are put under the regulatory compliances. October 2021 mandatory listing of non-regulatory devices. So, many of the non-regulated devices were placed under the regulations, right. All low class A and low moderate risk class B devices in August 2022. So, this was not my latest update, I had updated this a while back. All the low class A and class B devices such as clinical thermometers, wearable devices now have been placed under some form of regulations. So, earlier that leeway of not having a few wearable devices and things regulated have now come under the purview. But having said that, there are devices which are not recognized by the government just yet, because they are still in the research phase, and they may still take some time to get properly regulated, right. In August 2023, all moderate and high risk class C and class D devices have also been very stringently put under regulation, right. This is from this source. So, let us take a look at some of the ISO standards. We talked about BIS for a while, let us look at what the ISO standards really mean. We have been hearing about ISO standards for such a long time, and I am sure many of you are not aware of it, right. So, two important standards you are talking about when we speak about ISO is ISO 9001 and ISO 14001. Typically, these are the common standards which we talk about quite a bit, like when we talk about ISO. So, these are among the ISO's most well known standards ever, right. They are implemented by more than a million, that is 10 lakhs, more than a million organizations in some 175 countries. So, these are the most widely known regulations all across the globe. So, it is always a good idea to adapt some of these regulations from them, right, like while drafting your own regulations. ISO 9001, this is a very important point, please pay attention. ISO 9001 helps organizations to implement quality management. So, this is not a technical standard, this is an implementation of quality management protocols, so quality management do's and don'ts. ISO 14001 helps organizations to implement environmental management like risk, hazards, like putting out waste materials out of devices or any kind of industries. This is environmental, comes under the environmental management. So, 9001 comes under quality management and 14001 is environmental management. This we have to be very clear, these are not technical standards. So, ISO 9001, which is for quality management, in which quality refers to all the features of a product or a service which are required by the customer. We had been talking about this for a while. So, this is all coming in together now as we discuss the quality standards. Quality management. So, quality basically means that whether your product or service which you are offering is meeting the satisfaction of the customers or enhancing the satisfaction, and the second part is quality management, which means what does organization or your particular company do to ensure that its products or services satisfy the customer's quality requirements, right. We have talked about quality quite a bit at length. So, these are all quality standards. Do they comply with any regulations which are applicable to products and services? This could also be part of the quality standards, right. So, if you are looking at majority of the products which you buy in the market, daily consumables as well as medical devices, they are typically having some forms of ISO compliance as well as some extra certifications which are needed, right. So, quality management further also means what the organization does to enhance customer satisfaction and achieve continual improvement of its performance. ISO 4001 is an environmental management standard. This means what the organization does to minimize harmful effect on the environment caused by its activities, right, to conform to applicable regulatory requirements and to achieve continual improvement for its environmental performance. So, many of the devices may use a battery, or something which is non biodegradable, right, which may cause some harm, or something which is carcinogenic, right. So, these kind of things have to be managed as per the ISO 4001 standard. ISO 9000 and 4001 standards are generic standards. Generic means that the same standard can be applied to any organization, large or small whatever its product or service in any sector of the activity. So, it does not matter whether you are in healthcare space, or you are in digging oil, or you are trying to build like new products or build a car, whatever sector you are in, this ISO 9001, 4001 are the most generic standards which are into the quality of any products or services which you are offering, right. So, with this I would like to thank you. This is all for the session. Hopefully, you have learned something. We will see you next time for the next class, right. Thank you.